I found out my wife was cheating on me. Because of our son. He told me a story so innocent, so simple, that it tore my world apart in a single moment. That night, sitting at the dinner table, my little boy leaned forward and whispered, "Daddy, Coach told Mommy she's beautiful." At first, I laughed. Kids say silly things all the time. But then he added, "They were hugging after practice. Coach told me it was our secret." That was the moment my stomach dropped. I stared at my wife across the table, and she froze for just a second too long. I've known her for years. I can read every twitch of her face, and that one pause told me everything I needed to know. Something wasn't right. Something ugly was happening behind my back. Before I go further, let me pause for a second. If you like real, dramatic stories that pull you into the chaos of people's lives, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Trust me, this is only the beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured my wife and that coach. I tried to tell myself I was paranoid, that my son had misunderstood. But her excuses had been piling up for months. Extra meetings after practice, helping organize tournaments, late-night phone calls about scheduling. She had been so careful, but now a crack had opened, and I couldn't ignore it. The more I thought about it, the more the details started to make sense. The way she dressed up for those practices, like she was going on a date instead of standing around on a soccer field. The way she smiled at her phone when she thought nobody was watching. The nights she came home late, smelling faintly of cologne that sure as hell wasn't mine. I'd been blind, maybe because I wanted to believe she was still the woman I married. But now I couldn't unsee it that I didn't confront her right away. No, that's not me. I've never been the kind of man to explode and scream. I prefer silence, patience, precision. If she was betraying me, I wasn't about to hand her the chance to cover it up. I wanted the truth. And if it was true, I wanted her to feel the weight of it. I started with small things. I asked innocent questions. "Hey, how was practice today?" She'd give me short answers, sometimes a little too rehearsed. I noticed her grip tighten on her phone when I walked into the room. Once, when she went to take a shower, I casually picked it up. Locked, of course. She never used to lock her phone. That told me enough, but the real dagger came a few days later, again from my son. He climbed into my lap while I was reading, and in that casual, childlike way, he said, "Mommy and Coach want to get ice cream without me." She said I couldn't tell you. He said it like it was nothing, like it was normal. My chest burned. I kissed his head, told him he did nothing wrong, and I tucked him into bed. But inside, I was boiling. That was it. No more doubts. No more excuses. I had the truth now, spoken straight from my kid's mouth. And as much as it hurt, as much as it felt like someone had ripped my heart out, I knew I had to play this smart. I couldn't just walk up to her and demand answers. She'd lie, maybe twist it, maybe even make me look crazy. No, I had to catch her in the act that I lay awake until the sun came up, staring at the ceiling, going over every possibility. My marriage was already on fire. The only thing left was to decide how I wanted it to burn. And in that silence, I made a promise to myself. If she really was doing this, if she was betraying me with that coach, I wouldn't just walk away. I'd make sure she regretted ever thinking I was the kind of man she could fool. That was the night the seed of revenge was planted. After that night, I couldn't look at my wife the same way. Every smile she gave me felt fake. Every touch felt rehearsed. But instead of confronting her, I turned my pain into focus. If she was going to play games, I was going to beat her at them. I started small. Her phone had become her lifeline, and she guarded it like a treasure chest. That alone told me there were things inside she didn't want me to see. I remembered an old tablet our son used for games, one that was still synced to her email. Late one night, when the house was quiet, I powered it on. The inbox looked innocent at first. Grocery coupons, work memos, updates from the school. But buried between them, I spotted a chain of messages. Not from Coach, of course. He was clever enough to hide under a nickname. Something vague like J. Fields. But the words gave him away. "Great job today. You looked amazing. I'll stay late after practice. Can't wait to see you." I felt my jaw tighten. My hands shook as I scrolled. The messages were short, careful, but they painted a picture clear enough. This wasn't professional. This wasn't about soccer practice. This was about them. Still, I needed more. Words alone wouldn't destroy her excuses. So, I took another step. I installed a simple app on our shared computer. Nothing illegal, just something that logged activity whenever she connected her phone to charge. Within days, I had access to her hidden photo album. Most were innocent. Family snapshots, our son in his soccer uniform. But mixed in were pictures of her at the field. Angles I knew she didn't take herself. Shots of her laughing, standing too close to him. His reflection barely visible in the background. It was like a punch to the gut, but I stayed calm. Calm was my weapon. She thought she was careful. She thought I was blind. She had no idea I was already steps ahead. The turning point came one rainy Thursday. I told her I had to work late, but instead I drove straight to the soccer field. I parked far enough away that she wouldn't notice my car, and I waited. For almost an hour, I sat in the dark, windshield wipers tapping like a metronome, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I saw them. The kids had gone home long ago, but there she was, standing under the bleachers with him. She leaned in close, her body language screaming what her lips might have been whispering. I gripped the steering wheel, so tight my knuckles went white. I wanted to storm out, scream, drag her away. But I forced myself to stay still. Rage burns fast, but patience cuts deeper. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos from a distance. Grainy, but clear enough to prove what was happening. When she came home that night, dripping wet from the rain, she gave me a story about helping clean up equipment. I smiled, kissed her cheek, and pretended to believe her. Inside, though, I was boiling. Over the next week, I made it my mission to collect more. I borrowed a friend's camera, one with a long zoom lens, and I positioned myself on side streets during practice. I became a ghost, watching, waiting, capturing moments when her guard was down. Each picture, each piece of evidence, became another brick in the wall I was building. A wall I'd use to trap her when the time was right. But here's the thing. Living like that changes you. Every conversation with her was an act. Every dinner, every bedtime story with our son, I was wearing a mask. I laughed when I needed to, nodded when expected, but behind it all, I was cataloging every lie, every fake smile. The most difficult part wasn't the evidence. It was pretending not to care. There were nights when she'd crawl into bed next to me, phone buzzing quietly on her nightstand, and I'd have to lie there with my eyes closed, listening to her typing messages in the dark. She thought I was asleep. She thought she was safe. And every click of her keyboard was another nail in her coffin. One night, I decided to test her. I casually mentioned that I might come watch practice that weekend, just to cheer on our son. She froze mid-bite, her fork hovering above her plate. Then she smiled too quickly, too wide. "That'd be great," she said. But I could see the panic in her eyes. That was all the confirmation I needed to that moment. I knew two things for certain. One, my wife was guilty. Two, I wasn't ready to confront her just yet, because the truth alone wasn't enough for me anymore. I didn't just want to catch her. I wanted to break the little world she had built with him. And to do that, I needed the perfect plan. And believe me, I was just getting started. After I'd filled a folder with messages and photos, I realized evidence alone wouldn't finish this. Evidence proves a thing happened. It doesn't strip away the excuses, the denials, the smiling faces in public. I needed to corner them where their bravado turned into panic. And for that, I had to become invisible in a different way. Not the click and snap of a cameraman in a dark car anymore. I had to blend into the world they trusted to. I started showing up as a friendly face. I volunteered to bring snacks for practice one week, offered to help with the field setup, and made myself useful in small, obvious ways that made me part of the background. Parents at the field are like a chorus. They talk, they gossip, they get comfortable. While they were laughing about coffee orders and playdates, I watched how the coach and my wife moved, how their eyes met across the field, how they fell into private conversations when no one else was looking. First, it was all small things. The way he lingered a little too long near the shed. The whispered jokes that stopped when kids ran by. But I also started paying attention to edges, patterns of behavior nobody else noticed. He bragged too much about connections, school board members he knew, sponsors he could bring in. My wife soaked up the attention like sunlight. I filed those details away. They were useful. Pride is a window into a man's weaknesses. One afternoon, I bumped into another parent, Mark, a quiet guy whose kid was on the same team. We chatted about cleats and drills. He mentioned in passing that the coach sometimes took kids to private sessions at a nearby indoor facility, billed as extra conditioning. Mark's tone was casual, the exact kind of offhand remark that becomes ammunition. I listened, thanked him, and let him talk. People volunteer information if you let them, instead of using it to launch a public attack, which would have been messy and could have backfired on my son. I used it to manufacture controlled exposure. I signed my son up for one of those extra conditioning weekends under a fake reason, a scheduling conflict at our usual practice. I couldn't be there, and I made sure everyone knew it. That way, when the coach made moves in an environment he thought was private and unobserved, I would have an excuse to be nearby without it looking odd that I didn't break lines or hack accounts. I used patience, timing, and the social levers people hand you when they think you're harmless. I let the coach talk too loudly about things he shouldn't have, letting his grandstanding paint his own portrait. Once, while pretending to fix a sideline umbrella, I overheard him say, loud enough for the kids to hear, that he had pull with sponsors who loved discreet arrangements. That overconfidence was the crack I needed. Men like that always assume someone else is too naive to listen. So I began recording snippets of conversation. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal, just ambient audio of things he said while flattered parents were nearby. I knew how courts and school boards look at patterns more than single incidents. A whisper here, a boast there, a habit of private appointments. Together they sketch a reliable shape. At night, I mapped out timelines. Where they met, who saw them, which parents had started whispering. I kept pretending to be the helpful father, bringing juice boxes, tying shoelaces for other kids. The fewer eyes on me, the more they let down theirs. It felt like sharpening a blade in the dark, slow, precise, honed until it would cut clean. That I told myself I wasn't doing this to humiliate for the sake of cruelty. I wanted accountability. I wanted the person who used trust as a ladder to climb the lives of others to fall hard enough that he couldn't climb again. But beneath that rationalization was a darker satisfaction that I won't pretend I didn't feel. The thrill of being 2 steps ahead. Of watching the confident man build his own trap, by the time I had what I needed, dates, offhand comments. Corroborating parents who would, if asked, admit things they'd noticed. I had become an actor in their play. A smiling extra who knew the script better than the leads. The stage was set. Now it was a matter of timing. The trap had to be sprung where public shame met undeniable proof. And when that happened, there would be no room left for polite denials. And still, every evening I came home and tucked my son into bed. I read him the same story and pretended to be ordinary. The mask stayed on, but behind it the plan was tightening like a noose. Careful, methodical, and utterly unforgiving. By the time I'd built my timeline and stacked the evidence, I was living a double life. To my wife, I was the same predictable husband, bringing coffee in the morning, nodding when she talked about errands. To everyone else, I was the dependable dad who never missed a practice. But inside, I was a storm being, held back by a single thread. That thread finally snapped the night I overheard them myself that I'd stayed late at. Practice under the excuse of helping clean up. My son was already with my parents, so I had no reason to rush. From behind the storage shed, I heard their voices. At first, it was just laughter, but then words cut through the thin metal walls. "You don't have to go home right away, do you?" he asked. Her laugh was soft, nervous, but warm in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "I'll figure something out." The air left my lungs. It wasn't proof written on paper this time. It wasn't a grainy photo. It was her voice, my wife's voice, agreeing to betray me while I stood 20 feet away. That I dug my fingernails into my palm until it hurt. The urge to burst in, to tear their world apart right then, was overwhelming. I could see it in my mind, her face crumbling, his arrogance cracking. But I didn't, because rage is loud, and loud fades. Patience. Patience echoes forever. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to her, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, wondering how many lies were buried under that calm face. She rolled over, tucked her arm across my chest, as if nothing was wrong. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with a single thought. How do I make her feel the weight of every choice she's made? I knew I had to escalate. Gathering scraps wasn't enough anymore. I needed undeniable, inescapable evidence. Something that would leave no room for excuses, something that would collapse her little fantasy life in one blow. The next morning, I called in a favor. A buddy of mine, Rick, worked security systems for businesses. I didn't ask him to break laws or do anything shady, just to help me understand the tools people use to monitor spaces. He showed me legal ways parents sometimes keep an eye on practices, simple things like dash cams angled at fields or body cams disguised as keychains. That was all I needed. That weekend, while she thought I was running errands, I bought myself a tiny recording device that could clip onto a jacket. I wasn't going to hide in shadows anymore. I was going to stand right there, in the open, and let them hand me the proof with their own words. The first time I used it was brutal. I dropped my son at practice, greeted the coach with a smile, and then drifted away to the sidelines. The device was recording the whole time. I caught fragments, whispers, jokes, moments when they thought nobody was listening. It was like being stabbed slowly, each laugh another blade. But it was also victory. Every second was ammunition. That night, I listened back to the recording. At one point, when they thought the kids were too busy playing, she said, "I wish we could just be seen together without worrying." His answer was even worse. Patience. He'll never know. He'll never know. I paused the recording. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. A cold, bitter laugh that scared even me. He thought I'd never know. He thought I was a fool. But I was right there, building a case brick by brick, while they built their fantasy on sand. Why now? I had enough to confront her, enough to end it all. But that wasn't what I wanted. Not anymore. Ending it would have been merciful. What I wanted was the slow collapse, the kind of downfall that couldn't be hidden behind lies or excuses. So I waited. And I planned, because the perfect moment to strike wasn't when I was ready. It was when they least expected it. After I had recordings, photos, and a handful of overheard boasts, the anger shifted into something colder: strategy. Anger is a flare. Strategy is a map. I wanted their collapse to be surgical, not a messy tantrum. Public humiliation would be too easy. I wanted consequences that stuck. I wanted the coach's reputation shredded so he couldn't walk back into a gym. I wanted my wife to lose the safety net of social sympathy she'd been leaning on. Most of all, I wanted this to be done in a way that protected my son from becoming collateral damage. I started by listing vulnerabilities. The coach was loud about his connections, sponsors, school board friends, local clinic partnerships. He loved status. He posted pictures with donors and bragged at parent meetings about big opportunities he could bring. That arrogance was useful. Men who build careers on favors are scared of losing them. My wife's weak spot was social standing. She craved affirmation from other moms, liked to be seen supporting the team, and talked about being part of the community. Both relied on image more than truth. That's where I would hit them. I made a calendar. Not for revenge dates exactly, but for timing. School board meeting nights, games that would draw sponsors, community fundraisers. I mapped when key people, the athletic director, the top sponsor rep, the parent liaison, would be present. The goal wasn't to ambush them with rage. It was to present undeniable facts at moments when their world depended on plausible deniability. The least that I reached out carefully. I didn't want to drag my son into neighborhood gossip, so I confided in two people I trusted: Mark, the quiet dad who'd mentioned private sessions, and Rick, the guy who knew security gear. Mark agreed to be my lookout at a few practices. He'd noticed things and wanted this cleaned up as much as I did. Rick helped me understand how institutions react, who to call, how schools escalate complaints without blowing everything into the press. Their participation was framed as concern for children, not my personal vendetta, and that framing mattered. Next, I neutralized excuses. I organized the evidence into a timeline: messages, photos, recorded conversations, dates and locations, and labeled each item. I created copies and backups. I didn't send anything yet. Not until I could thread together how each piece would look to a school board, to a sponsor, to a friend who might be sympathetic to my wife. Dry facts, no melodrama. Institutions respond to documents, not rants. I also prepared a softer front. I started writing a letter, not a screaming breakup, but a calm, focused account aimed at protecting kids and the program. It read like a concerned father reaching out. Here are dates. Here are behaviors that put children at risk. Here's why the program needs oversight. I planned to deliver that letter to the athletic director and to a trusted parent on the board, anonymously if needed. The approach was deliberate. Frame the issue as systemic, not personal. Remove the possibility for them to play the victim card. There were moments when cruelty whispered to me. I could leak the photos online, turn this into a public spectacle, and watch everything burn. But I caught myself. My son's name shouldn't be dragged through that mire. The plan had to be about accountability, not spectacle. That restraint felt strange and satisfying, a proof that I hadn't entirely been consumed by vengeance. Finally, I rehearsed a public moment in my head. The coach presented with a sponsor at a game. The athletic director seated nearby, parents applauding. That would be the test. If I timed the complaint and the evidence right, if the sponsor smelled scandal and the board smelled liability, decisions would be made on the spot. Jobs could be paused, volunteer licenses reviewed, and quietly, painfully, doors shut. As I mapped every step, I also mapped exits. If my son got wind of anything, if his school life risked damage, I'd call everything off. Revenge had rules now. No children hurt, no illegal acts, no reckless shouting into the void. It felt like a chess game where every piece mattered. When the plan felt tight, when every contingency had a counter, I slept for the first time in weeks without waking to dread. The trap was not yet sprung, but it existed. And for the first time since that whispered confession at dinner, I felt ready. The plan lived in my head for days, like a secret engine humming under my ribs. I was patient, almost calm. But every time my wife smiled at her phone, every time the coach puffed up his chest in front of the other parents, I felt the urge to set it all in motion. And then, one night, the opportunity came. There was a community meeting scheduled for parents of all sports programs. Sponsors were there, the athletic director, and even a couple of local reporters who covered school events. Perfect stage, perfect audience. If I played my cards right, I could start cracking their image without even mentioning their names directly. I showed up early, sat in the back, and waited. My wife walked in wearing the same practice smile she always used in public, greeting other parents, acting like she was the model of community spirit. The coach arrived a few minutes later, slapping backs, shaking hands, talking louder than anyone else in the room. He was pitching himself as the golden boy of the program. It was almost funny watching him strut while I sat there with a folder of receipts ready to slice that ego open. When the floor opened for parent concerns, I raised my hand. Calm, measured, just another dad with a question. I just wanted to ask. I began, what oversight exists for one-on-one sessions between coaches and kids? Are those monitored? Are they logged anywhere? You could feel the air shift. People shuffled in their seats. The athletic director frowned, clearly caught off guard. The coach, sitting up front, forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Oh, those are completely voluntary. He jumped in quickly, his voice a little too tight. We make sure. I cut him off politely. Because I've heard parents mention extra sessions where no other staff were present. That feels like something worth addressing. Murmurs rippled through the room. Heads turned. The director scribbled a note. And just like that, the first crack appeared. I didn't accuse anyone by name. I didn't even look at my wife. But the message landed. Later, in the parking lot, she cornered me. Why would you bring that up? Do you know how bad that made him look? Her voice was sharp, panicked. That told me everything. She wasn't worried about the kids or the program. She was worried about him. I shrugged, keeping my tone neutral. It's a fair question, isn't it? Transparency helps everyone. Then I walked away, leaving her standing there, fists clenched at her sides. That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to scream or point fingers. I just had to ask the right question in the right place. The room did the rest. Over the next week, whispers spread. Parents started comparing notes. One mentioned how the coach always scheduled private meetings. Another admitted they'd felt uneasy but never spoke up. It was like striking a match in dry grass. I didn't have to fan the flames. They spread on their own. Meanwhile, at home, my wife grew restless. She paced more, snapped at small things, spent longer on her phone. One night she asked, "Do you think people are starting rumors about him?" I met her gaze and said nothing, just let silence hang in the room. Watching her squirm was almost satisfying. She wanted me to reassure her, to play the oblivious husband. Instead, I gave her nothing, but I didn't stop there. Quietly, I delivered my letter, the calm, professional one, to the athletic director's office. No accusations, no personal names, just a timeline of concerning behaviors I'd observed. I knew he couldn't ignore it. Liability is poison in school administration, and the coach had just become a risk. The trap was tightening. The beauty of the first strike was that it didn't expose me as the attacker. To the world, I was just a father asking responsible questions. To my wife and her lover, though, I had just drawn the first line in the sand, and they had no idea how much further I was willing to go. When you hold a plan that sharp, the hardest part isn't building it. It's waiting to use it. Every day, I went through the motions of family life. But in my mind, I was rehearsing the strike. And then the right opportunity finally appeared. The school sent out an email about a community soccer showcase. Sponsors would be in attendance, parents were invited to mingle, and the coach would be front and center. That was my stage. In the week leading up to it, I pushed the mask harder than ever. I complimented my wife, asked her about practice, even teased her about spending so much time with the team. She laughed it off, never suspecting I already had a folder full of her lies. By then, I'd stopped feeling much pain. It was almost amusement. Watching her play a role while I was holding the script. 2 nights before the showcase, I quietly dropped an anonymous envelope into the athletic director's mailbox. Inside was my carefully written letter, a clean timeline of dates, and a flash drive with audio snippets and photos. No accusations about my marriage, just a concerned father pointing out inappropriate boundaries between a coach and a parent. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The facts were enough. On the day of the event, I arrived early with my son. We laughed, ate snacks, and he ran off to play with teammates. Meanwhile, my eyes tracked every move. The coach strutted around like a celebrity, shaking hands, bragging about his plans for the team's future. My wife hovered nearby, her body angled toward him as if the crowd didn't exist. The first move wasn't mine to make, it was theirs. During the introductions, the athletic director's tone was stiff. He barely looked at the coach, and when it came time for him to speak, the director stood just a little too close, as though supervising. The coach didn't notice. My wife didn't notice. But I did. My envelope had landed. I didn't confront them that night. That would have spoiled the point. Instead, I acted like the perfect family man. I clapped during the presentations, took pictures of my son with his friends, and even asked the coach about training drills, pretending to hang on his every word. All the while, I saw the athletic director making quiet notes in the corner. The second phase of the plan unfolded a few days later. Word started to trickle through the parent group chats. The board was reviewing professional boundaries in the soccer program. A few moms started whispering about the coach being too close to certain parents. The gossip didn't name my wife yet, but I could see the panic flicker in her eyes when she read her messages. That was the brilliance of it. I didn't have to expose her myself. All I had to do was nudge the dominoes and let the system do the rest. People love a scandal. They fill in the gaps on their own.at home. I kept my cool. She grew more distracted, spending long hours helping with program paperwork, while I quietly tucked our son into bed and waited. I noticed her staring at her phone longer, sometimes biting her lip, sometimes pacing. It was clear the tension was spreading, though she hadn't connected it back to me. Meanwhile, I kept feeding the fire in subtle ways. I made sure to casually mention to another dad that the coach seems to have a favorite parent. Nothing more, just bait for his imagination. Within a day, that remark had turned into a swirling rumor I overheard from someone else. And yet, I wasn't finished. This was just the first move. The foundation was shaking, but the house hadn't collapsed yet. Late one night, while she thought I was asleep, I listened as she whispered on the phone. Her voice was trembling. "They're looking into things. Don't worry. I'll handle it." I closed my eyes, barely holding back a smile. She was already scrambling to protect him. She thought she was saving her secret. She didn't know she was stepping right into the trap I'd set. The first blow had landed, and the next one would make sure neither of them walked away unscathed. The first crack is quiet. You almost miss it if you're not paying attention. But once it starts, the whole wall comes down. That's exactly what happened in the weeks after the showcase. At first, it was whispers. Parents started pulling me aside, lowering their voices. "Have you heard? The board's investigating the coach." They said it like a secret, like they were letting me in on something I didn't already know. I played dumb, shrugged, and acted concerned, while inside I felt the ground shifting beneath him exactly as I'd planned. The Real explosion came at a Saturday match. The bleachers were packed, kids running up and down the sidelines, sponsors shaking hands, parents snapping photos. The coach strutted out like he owned the place, blowing his whistle, chest puffed out. But there was tension in the air. You could feel it, like electricity before a storm. Midway through the game, the athletic director arrived. That alone was unusual. He rarely showed up except for championship matches. He didn't sit with the crowd. Instead, he walked directly onto the field and had a hushed conversation with the referees. Heads turned. Parents began murmuring. My wife froze at the top of the bleachers, clutching her phone. I saw her eyes dart to the coach, then to the director, then back to her phone again. And then, the moment I'd been waiting for. The director called the coach over in front of everyone. The game kept playing, but all eyes locked on the two men at the sidelines. Their voices were too low to hear, but the body language was unmistakable. The director's finger pointed toward the stands, then toward the parking lot. The coach shook his head, his face reddening, his arms spreading wide in protest. The director didn't flinch. Within seconds, the coach's whistle was hanging from his neck like a noose, and he stormed off the field under the watchful eyes of every parent. Every sponsor, every kid. Gasps rippled through the bleachers. Parents leaned into each other, whispering theories. He's suspended. It's about the parents. Some kind of complaint. Nobody said names yet, but you could see the puzzle pieces clicking into place. My wife's face turned pale as paper. She pretended to text, then slipped away from the crowd like a shadow, disappearing toward the parking lot that I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The beauty of this moment was that it wasn't me exposing her. It was the system, the community, the very people she wanted approval from. And they were turning against her without even knowing the full truth. When my son asked why the coach left, I kept my answer simple. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices. That's why you always have to be honest, buddy. He nodded and went back to cheering for his teammates. He didn't need the ugly details. Not yet. After the game, the gossip became a wildfire. Parents gathered in clusters in the parking lot, phones out, voices hushed but urgent. I caught fragments as I walked past. Inappropriate relationships. Boundaries crossed. Complaints filed. It spread faster than I could have managed myself. That night at home, my wife was silent. She busied herself with chores she didn't need to do, folding laundry that was already folded, scrubbing counters that were already clean. When I finally asked, "You okay?" she flinched. Her answer was clipped. Just tired. I didn't push. I wanted her to sit with it, to stew in the silence, to feel the weight of suspicion from everyone around her. That was the kind of punishment she'd never admit out loud but couldn't escape from. Later, while she thought I was asleep, I heard her on the phone again. Her voice was sharper this time, tinged with panic. "They suspended you?" "No, don't say anything stupid. Just keep your head down. I'll figure something out." I almost laughed into the pillow. Keep your head down. Too late for that. His reputation was already bleeding out in the court of public opinion, and she was tangled in the wreckage. But I wasn't done. Not even close. This was only the public fracture. The humiliation. The next move would be personal. A strike that left no doubt, no excuse, no way back for either of them. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. The suspension rattled them, but it wasn't enough. People forget scandals if the fire burns out too quickly. I didn't want whispers. I wanted the truth to stain them so deeply they couldn't wash it off. The time had come to deliver the final strike that I waited until the following week, when the school board held its monthly meeting. These gatherings were usually boring, budget talks, calendar votes, the kind of stuff only diehard parents attended. But this time, the room was buzzing. Everyone had heard about the coach's sudden removal. Nobody had answers yet, just rumors swirling like smoke. Perfect that I slipped an unmarked folder into the stack of documents handed to the board chair. Inside, printouts of the emails, screenshots of the messages, photos of my wife with the coach, and transcriptions of their whispered conversations from practice. Nothing vulgar, nothing sensationalized, just facts. Cold, undeniable facts. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. As the meeting dragged on, I sat in the back row, arms folded, watching the board members quietly trade pages across the table. I saw their expressions shift, brows furrowed, lips tightened, pens scribbling notes. The audience didn't know what was on those papers, but they could feel the tension thickening in the air. Then came the moment. The chair cleared his throat and announced that due to new information provided, the board will be conducting a formal review of staff and volunteer conduct in the soccer program. He didn't say names. He didn't have to. The parents in that room weren't stupid. Eyes darted to the empty seat where the coach usually sat. And then, a few turned toward my wife that I watched her shrink into her chair, hands gripping her phone like a lifeline. She didn't dare look at anyone. She knew. She knew the walls were closing in, And for the first time, there was no escape route. That night at home, the storm hit. She cornered me in the kitchen, her voice sharp, almost frantic. "They've got things. Emails, photos. Do you know anything about this?" I looked her dead in the eye, calm as ever. Why would I know? Maybe people just got tired of pretending not to see what was right in front of them. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. The silence between us was louder than any fight we'd ever had. For once, she had no script, no excuse to lean on. Over the next days, the fallout spread fast. Sponsors quietly withdrew support. Parents pulled their kids from extra sessions. The coach's name became a punchline in text chains, his arrogance finally catching up with him. And my wife? She became a ghost in her own circles. Friends who used to fawn over her stopped inviting her to coffee. Other moms avoided her at drop-off. Reputation isn't something you lose with a bang. It drains slowly, drop by drop, until you're empty. I didn't gloat openly. I didn't need to. The satisfaction was in the stillness, watching her scroll through her phone at midnight, searching for messages from friends who weren't responding anymore. Watching the coach pace outside practice fields, hoping someone would believe his side of the story. The final strike wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was precise, measured, and devastating. Their little secret had been dragged into the light, stripped bare until nothing was left but shame. And the best part? I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't even broken character. They did this to themselves. I'd just handed the world a mirror. Now the only thing left was to end it on my terms. The board investigation had taken away her safety net. The coach was out. The whispers had grown into full-blown rumors, and her phone stayed eerily quiet. But there was still one last move I had to make. Not for the community, not for the board, but for myself. It was time to look her in the eye and end this marriage on my terms. I waited until the weekend, when our son was staying overnight with my parents. The house was quiet, heavy. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone with that same blank stare she'd worn all week. I placed a manila envelope on the table in front of her and slid it across. She didn't touch it at first, just stared at it, her throat tightening. Then slowly, she opened it. Inside were copies of the photos, the transcripts, the messages. Proof she couldn't deny. Proof I'd been collecting for weeks while she played pretend. Her hands shook as she pulled out the pages. You knew?" Her voice cracked. I leaned back in my chair, my tone steady, almost calm. "I knew everything. From the very beginning. From the night our son told me his secret." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. For once, she wasn't in control of the story. For once, she was the one trapped in silence. "I can explain," she began. "No," I cut her off. My voice was sharp, final. "You had every chance to stop. You chose not to. You didn't just betray me. You lied to our son, dragged him into your mess, and thought I was too blind to notice. You built your little fantasy and thought it wouldn't cost you. But this is the bill coming due." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. The months of lies, the countless excuses, the nights I pretended to sleep while she texted him. Those had burned every ounce of pity out of me. "I'm filing for divorce," I said plainly. "I'll take care of our son. I'll make sure he grows up in a house where honesty means something. You can explain to him one day why you lost everything. But I won't let your choices drag me down any further." She begged then, her words tumbling over each other. Promises to change, pleas for forgiveness, desperate apologies. It was almost pitiful, watching the confident, secretive woman reduced to stammering fragments. But I didn't waver. "You had a chance," I repeated, "and you threw it away." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. That night, I packed a small bag and left the house. I drove to my parents', kissed my son goodnight, and felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was freedom. The weight was gone. By the time the papers were filed, the coach had disappeared from the community, and my wife had become a rumor whispered about but never defended. The fallout was hers to live with. Mine was already over, and as I walked out of that courthouse, documents in hand, I realized something. Revenge isn't always about shouting or grand gestures or burning everything down. Sometimes, the most devastating revenge is simply refusing to carry someone else's lies another step. This was my line in the sand, and I'd never step back over it. The divorce was final quicker than I expected. Maybe it was because she didn't have the strength to fight, or maybe she knew there wasn't a fight to win. Either way, the papers were signed, the house was sold, and I walked away with what mattered most, my son and my peace of mind. The first few weeks felt strange. The silence of an empty house was heavy at first, like walking through ruins. But slowly, that silence turned into something better, freedom. No more pretending, no more suspicion, no more walking on eggshells. Just me, my boy, and a fresh start. I threw myself into fatherhood. We spent weekends at the park, late nights building forts in the living room, and even joined a local hiking group. My son's laugh, the one I thought I might lose in all this chaos, came back louder than ever. Every time I heard it, it reminded me why I'd fought so hard to stay calm, why I'd chosen strategy over rage. He deserved stability. And now, he had it. I also focused on myself for the first time in years. I picked up running again, started reconnecting with old friends, and even explored new career opportunities I'd been putting off. Piece by piece, I rebuilt the man I'd been before the lies crept into my home. Stronger this time, sharper, less willing to tolerate poison disguised as love. As for her, she faded from my world. The last I heard, she was trying to rebuild her social circle, but reputations don't heal easily when they're built on deception. The coach was gone, vanished from the community like he'd never existed. Their story ended where mine began again. I regret how I handled it? Not for a second. Some people think revenge has to be loud, dramatic, messy, but I proved that patience and precision cut deeper than anger ever could. I didn't just walk away. I made sure the truth followed them like a shadow while I stepped into the light. And now, I live happier. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I gained: clarity, freedom, and a life where I can finally breathe without second-guessing the person next to me. So, what do you think? Did I do the right thing by staying calm and letting the truth destroy them instead of me? What would you have done in my place? If you want to hear more stories like this, true, raw, and unforgettable, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Hit that like button and leave a comment below telling me how you'd have handled it. Your thoughts keep these stories alive, because sometimes the best revenge is simply living well after the storm.